The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be a world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
All right, Easkey Britton on the lineup. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, it's the afternoon for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Just out of the water here in the Atlantic in the northwest of Ireland in Donegal, warming up with a cup of tea. Technology's amazing.
It is. I was going to ask if you surf today, but that's excellent. So you're in Donegal today. You know, are you with anybody? Are you by yourself?
Yeah, there's family all around, so we're really lucky because Ireland's in a lockdown again, but everyone's close by and we can still get to the sea. And so, yeah, I'm actually at my birthplace where I grew up, and where my mum and dad live and sister, and so and everyone surfs, so it's a good vibe.
I'm glad you brought that up because I like starting these at the moment with kind of getting real time feedback on how everyone's doing and you know, how has the past year's experience been for you in Ireland, presuming you've been there the whole time?
Yeah, it's the most grounded in one place I've been in my life for a very long time. You know, both with my research work and my surfing, I'm usually on the road with it a lot, traveling. And in one part, personally, actually, it's been amazing to have that kind of stillness and groundedness at this stage in my life. And my partner started a farm, market gardening. So that's been a really cool way to actually like literally reconnect with the land, you know, getting your hands dirty and learning about that. But yeah, I guess the importance of our connection to place has really come home to me. And then the importance of relationships and how we create connection in these times as well, which can be a real challenge. And there's definitely things I'm missing. We're just what we're realizing what it means to be human and what it is we really value most. And it's just been interesting, kind of fascinating to see. It's not that surprising, I suppose, but the huge pull nature has had for people and the need to be outdoors, outside, and how important that access is. And in Ireland in particular, it's quite, the water is having a huge pull on people, and the need for people to go to the sea. Maybe people who haven't been in the sea since their childhood are now like going in and sea swimming. And so that's quite remarkable too.
You know, at one point we were calling these COVID episodes the lineup at low tide, sort of implying that it would be
low tide.
Exactly. We were like, it's going to be a temporary thing, but you know, here we are 12 months later, and really, as you've articulated, in a situation whether, you know, it's personally or in our families or the broader surfing world or any other communities we exist in, where we're kind of in uncharted territory psychologically and emotionally. And I'd imagine it's something that you've thought a bit about both personally and professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of strange. I mean, professionally, up until now, I was really intensely immersed in academia and working at a university here in Galway, and just on a lot of big research projects. Amazing kind of opportunity to collaborate with a great mix of kind of scientists all on oceans and human health, and also doing some teaching. But just realizing how relentless that pace was, that there was just no moment for pause. There was no ebb and flow or low tide. It was just all go. And how important, like how much as humans, and especially when it comes to our creative thinking and accessing that creativity, we need those pauses. I just didn't realize how extended this one would be. But it's definitely, I think for me, it's something I've been thinking about for a while anyway, but in terms of our notion and concept of time is definitely being drastically altered as well. And I think some of our relationship with time has been really unhealthy in any case. So It's interesting to see, how do we find a new rhythm in all of this without it, it feeling like this for some people, like I suppose like a Groundhog Day almost with another lockdown. But the flip side of that is that we're more present to noticing these sort of changes in our own environment again.
I think it was Groundhog Day the other day, and I think most people in my life were like, I'm not even touching this joke at the moment. Like, it's just,
we don't even have it in Ireland.
but you know, it's interesting, right? Because the surfing world and the academic world are it's not that common that they overlap just broadly, right? And you've had this amazingly unique experience of which I want to get to, you know, like sort of a surfing existence, and then I'd like to talk to is sort of an existence in the institutions of surfing, and then into academia, and as you're talking about now, almost sort of this collective pause that everyone's using to reevaluate. But I am curious, like, so what specifically for the listeners is your current profession and area of focus, and how did you arrive here?
Good question. When I ponder on myself a lot. I guess in a nutshell, I'm considered a marine social scientist. So in the world of science, a real kind of hybrid, very interdisciplinary, of pulling together strands from. I have a background in environmental science, and I focused within that much more on this human dimension, the human relationship with our ocean. That's kind of then morphed and evolved into marine social science as its own discipline. So looking at, again, what that means are simply our human relationship with the sea. And for the most part, looking at how to restore that one, because it's quite a broken one, at least in our more Western modern societies. Yeah, and I think that's just been the common thread for me all along. Because of that intimacy I've always had with the sea, by the nature of my birth and where I grew up, and the fact I was born into a surfing family in Ireland, which is an unusual thing back then. Yeah, so and then the sea has always been that space that's fueled my curiosity. So maybe that's what drew me into wanting to like dig into it way more through the science part of it too. And as surfers, we're just so immersed in the ocean and witness to all these changes, and there's so much more going on. I don't know. Yeah, it just, for me, it seemed natural to want to know more.
And I'd imagine that you went to school and you got degrees. Where did you go and what did you study?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a linear path at all. I mean, to put in a bit of context, where I grew up in Donegal, it's one of the most sort of regional, kind of peripheral parts of Ireland, very rural, not a lot happening. And even at the time when I was learning to surf as a kid, I started surfing when I was 4 years old. There wasn't any kids in my school who surfed. It was still considered a total nutcase thing to do. I mean, it is in Ireland, probably still is, but it's changing. But surfing to me then was this almost like this ticket to get out, to go explore, travel, you know, just seeing all those surf travel stories. And then I thought if I competed, then I can go on, you know, with the Irish surf team and travel and go to other parts of the world. So that's kind of how my sort of little naive motivation as a kid started out.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because how cold does the water get there when you're surfing in Ireland?
It probably gets to kind of 6 or 8 degrees Celsius in the middle of winter, which is pretty cold. But the problem in Ireland is more that is the wind. We get so much wind with it too. So there's a lot of wind chill. Wouldn't get like enough snow or ice very often, but it's pretty stormy.
It's funny because I've got my twins, a boy and a girl, and they're 7, and I'm trying very consciously not to be the surfing dad, just because of where I work and where I have worked and my experience, to be like, oh, they're going to surf, and everyone in your extended family's like, they're going to be the next Kelly Slater, and it's like you've seen enough horror stories to be like, no, I really don't want them to do it, but they kind of pick it up through osmosis, and you get excited. But you know, I live in Ventura County, which is north of LA, and I kind of balance it out where it's like, it's not the most user-friendly place to learn because it is colder and it's a little bit more exposed, and you don't kind of have these nice baby waves everywhere to get comfortable on. But then I think about like having to learn in places like Ireland, where I'm like, man, the barrier to entry must be so high because the conditions are so raw.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me, in a way, I'm not sure. my story was almost, a lot of it was almost like laid out for me, at least as an optional script to follow, in that my name Easkey comes from the Irish for fish. It's the name of a surf break on the west coast of Ireland. And I have this kind of surfing lineage, which is unusual to have as at this generation in Ireland, born into a family that surfs. Both my parents, and so them passing that on to me and my sister, but also even having my grandparents involved with the sort of the origins of the whole surf scene in Ireland. There was no getting away from it. Yeah.
And you tell us a little bit about that, because I understand that your grandmother is intrinsic to surfing lore in Ireland.
She is. She was quite a remarkable woman, Mary Britton, and my grandfather Vinnie Britton. But they had a hotel here in Rosnarla, right on the beach. And she kind of got that going. Super enterprising woman in the 60s in Ireland. So Ireland at the time was probably one of the poorest countries in Europe. Tourism just didn't exist, and yet she really pioneered tourism by traveling to the States and promoting Ireland and those kind of American Irish ties. And her travels brought her to Malibu sometime, I guess, in the late 60s. And she stayed at a hotel right at Malibu Beach and saw the surfing and the waves and connected the dots to the waves back home in front of her hotel. And it's, I don't know, maybe it was because she had such a sort of innovative, enterprising mind. She managed to get her hands on some of the first surfboards to enter into the country in Ireland. And she's the mother of 5 boys, my dad included. So you can imagine when these surfboards arrive into the hotel, well, they must have thought, and of course there was no access to any reference to what surfing was or how you're supposed to do it back then. And most of what my dad would have learned would be from traveling surfers, in those early years. So they took them into the sea, no wetsuits or anything, just floating around on the waves, lying down initially until they saw a traveling surfer stand up from the UK and they realized, all right, you can stand up in these things. And so my dad was 12 at the time. And then both my grandparents, they also, they kind of initiated what's now the longest running surf event in Ireland, the Rosnarla Surfing Intercounties. So it's been going over 50 years. And it was, I guess, what's really cool about that, it's an event that brings together people from all over the country, north and south of the border, you kind of would get together as a team. So it turned what is a very individualistic sport into a kind of team sport. So you sort of surf together, represent your county, and all these teams from all over the country would meet at the end of the season in October. And it was just a real social way to kind of create that community, surf community in Ireland. And it's amazing because it's remained and followed through all these years later. So
I think about this a lot, whether it's just in terms of development and how it was, as you outlined in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where regions and surfers had to develop, their own approach to wave riding or their own sort of board building techniques or fitness techniques or whatever. And their reference points for how to get better were, as you said, like traveling surfers that would come there that maybe you could glean something off of, and how in modern society, the information age has really leveled all that out in a lot of ways, and in a way kind of homogenized it. And I think there's probably pluses and minuses to that. There's probably, access to best practices in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways, there's sort of a loss of sort of individualistic or communal culture, which you're kind of outlining here. I do want to bring it back to your current work in academia quickly, and then we'll kind of move all over the place. But your work in marine social science and given your unique background, is it a collaborative experience at university where you're working with other professors and other academics? And if so, I'd imagine you have a fairly diverse background compared to some of your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to doing case studies, I'm literally get immersed in the ocean. It's perfect. For the last 5 years in particular, I've really specialized in what's going to become known as blue health. So a concept that now defines essentially the the mental and physical health benefits of being in, on, or near the water, and in particular the ocean. So it's just quite incredible. I get to specialize in an area like that. And yeah, I work with a lot of, you can imagine, researchers and scientists from so many different disciplines as well. So from, the marine scientists, but also social scientists looking at behavior change, medical backgrounds, so looking at that link between the health of the ocean and the health of humans, both the benefits, but also then the impacts, like what's at risk when that environment isn't cared for, and also just how much we stand to benefit if we do look after it and restore it. And so I'm most interested in kind of unpacking what pull the sea has on us, why are we drawn to it, and how it affects us, I suppose, more emotionally and psychologically. So those restorative and in particular therapeutic benefits. So it's being used as like a therapy. Ocean therapy is a thing. It's brilliant.
I'd imagine some of your colleagues must view you as some sort of superhuman when it comes to, if their background is sort of almost exclusively in academia and sort of book learning and classrooms. And then when it comes to field study and you're putting your hand up to be like, yeah, I'll go out there and like, I'll do the actual field work.
Yeah, and I mean, what I love about it too, it's like I think especially the role of science in academia is that there's so much knowledge and understanding out there, but what gets lost is the application of it. Like, how does that translate into everyday reality? How do you put it into action? And that's where those kind of collaborations and community-based work is really important. So I'm excited for a new project that's just kicking off, funded by the EU on surf therapy called Inclusi. But it's looking at creating a framework, I suppose, to create greater accessibility for surfing for people with physical disabilities. I'm working directly with surf therapy charity Liquid Therapy here in Ireland, and then we partner with a bunch of other ones all across Europe. So that kind of research is what really excites me, when you get to actually work with people who are like doing the work on the ground and supporting the work they do and helping to evidence the benefits.
And it feels like it's almost something of like an age-old challenge with surfing, because people like to say like, oh, it's indescribable, which there's an element of truth to that, because the experience of it is so special and it sort of defies categorization in a lot of ways. So people trying to synthesize it for whatever purpose, in academia or therapy or commercialism or whatever it is, there's always a challenge there, right? Because people kind of gravitate towards how special it is and how transformative the actual experience is. But it's because it is something that kind of, I don't know, bristles against constraint in a lot of ways, for lack of a better phrase. Have you had any challenges in your own work with that and trying to kind of like, okay, how do I articulate this particular component of it and its impact on human beings? And I'm just fascinated by that process.
Yeah, it's super challenging. I mean, I'm often, for me, it's my connection with the sea is so intimate and personal, as well as then there's that sort of, the more sort of objective scientific role, which you can actually be objective. Yeah, and how do you evidence something like that that's in such a, ever-changing, unpredictable, constantly moving, fluid environment, and you're trying to draw on, similar sort of tests or surveys that have been carried out in, randomized controlled trials in a laboratory with a pharmaceutical drug. You're trying to show the benefits for, treating things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, like the whole spectrum. And sort of you intuitively know and feel that there's this healing effect when you're in the water. And then how do you communicate that into a world that's used to having things so structured and controlled? So in part, I think it's really important we don't over-medicalize it, but also find, I think, these more creative ways of articulating, as you say, what it is about water, the ocean, and surfing. And I think it's different things to different people. Like I've worked with... I think what I've loved about surfing is is the places it's taken me to are places I might never have otherwise ended up with or have found any kind of familiarity or connection. So the connecting force was surfing to establish a conversation, or to, I'm talking about places like going to Iran and the Middle East, and the whole connection with female surfers in particular there. But it's just a wonderful facilitator of connection, I found. And then it's also really opened my eyes to the importance of understanding and celebrating the diversity of those experiences, of why people go surf in the first place, and how it makes them feel.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about that too, because I feel like there are probably some parallels, whether you work in media, or you work in the industry, you work in the sport, or you work in academia, where you're working with surfing. And one of the objectives, as we were talking about it, is to, effectively and authentically synthesize it in a way for broader consumption, in a positive way, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. And what I've found, and I wonder if it's the same in academia, is that we probably all know people that are so in deep on core surfing that they have a hard time kind of bridging to a broader, maybe uninitiated group of people, like why it's special. And then concurrently, you probably have people from outside of surfing that they're not open or receptive to some of those very, very special or authentic things in surfing, where they're not bridging either. So I've always found that the best way to do it is to kind of have people inside of surfing that are willing to look outside of surfing, and then vice versa, people outside of surfing that are willing to look inside of surfing to create a balance. Have you found it's the same in your academic work?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I always wonder as well. I mean, really, just so in my own bubble, my mega bias that
sure
how amazing surfing is. So I always have been questioning, okay, why water, and what is it about water? And there's just a whole interesting conversation to have there. But then also, what is it about the ocean? What is it about waves? And what is it about actually surfing itself? And we've carried out like a kind of a global review on all the studies that have been done on those kind of more therapeutic interventions. So using things, everything, from sailing to surfing and swimming. And actually surf therapy is the ones that is coming up as the most sort of used, the most studied. It's really kind of exploding all around the world. So that's kind of really, I'm really curious kind of as to why. And for really diverse kind of groups. But it does, the kind of fascinating. So a few things about, okay, why surfing? I think in the work I've come across working, with kids with autism, to, around women's leadership and confidence building and connecting with their bodies in places like Iran and Papua New Guinea, to, just such a diverse spectrum of people. A lot of it is to do, I think in one part, there's something about the ocean itself when you go there and you're doing something like surfing, which is maybe inherently playful especially when you're first learning. What am I trying to say here? There's a few things that come up again and again. One is that it's like this place where the freedom to be who you are. So this ability to leave your kind of land-based persona behind, and just really the ocean is this place that's very, really accepting and without judgment. I think that comes up a lot, which is so interesting because then, if you look at through like a media lens, that in surfing, that's a whole other story. But the personal experience or encounter with the sea and surfing, that's what comes up. And the other thing I think is also about the ocean and how it's this space that kind of holds us. And I've been definitely feeling that this year. And it's also why I'm not sure if it's just about surfing, but I think it's about any way that we can have that direct encounter with the ocean in a positive way. So even with sea swimming, for example, and how immersive that is, especially for the whole body. Then the other thing then with surfing in particular is that it is such a challenging environment. And so I think that's really interesting to see outcomes with surf therapy programs with kids in particular, because it instills a sense of independence and autonomy that's so lacking in a lot of kids' upbringing nowadays. How controlled their environments are, how scheduled and timetabled the activities are. Okay, maybe you might schedule like the surf session or lesson or whatever, but once they're in the ocean, it's this freedom they have and that moment where they catch the wave and they're not, they have to roll with it. If they wipe out, that's an experience that's wholly theirs. So that's actually really important. And a lot of the kids will say that and as an outcome afterwards, how meeting those kinds of fears and challenges really helped them feel a sort of sense of, I suppose, confidence, but also change and transformation in themselves. And then, of course, a lot of it is, surfing is also being used then in terms of rehabilitation for different disabilities, especially spinal injuries and things like that, where it's incredible for mobility, balance, and even most recently, there's still so much we don't know. You know, it's incredible how there's this recent study just come out in Australia with people who have cystic fibrosis, and it's showing that when a certain group were coming back from surfing, they were having far less kind of flare-ups. Right. And so scientists are wondering, why is this? And it's to do, I think, because funnily enough, with surfing, it's probably because you get tossed around and wipe out so much and swallow so much seawater. So it was the seawater that they were ingesting and the salt water that was really soothing the body and reducing these pulmonary or flare-ups in their lungs, which is then now, obviously, you can make that much more accessible if people don't have access to the sea by finding some way to do this saltwater therapy. But yeah, it's so there's so much. I think what fascinates me is that there's still so much we don't know, about the ocean.
Well, and it kind of speaks to why it's so important to protect it. And you're part of the 30 by 30 campaign that our friends at Pure are putting out. And it's a campaign that is calling for protection of 30% of the ocean by 2030. Can you talk a little bit about what that campaign means to you and why you want to be involved?
Yeah, it's such an important campaign, and I'm really grateful to be involved with some actually incredible kind of ocean ambassadors from around the world, and some dear friends of mine. Well, what I really like about it, because I think within science and in the work that I do, often a huge failing is the communication element. So the power in the storytelling. And so what is so important about this campaign is that it sort of talks about and explores our human relationship with the ocean in this really personal way through all these diverse lenses of why the ocean matters personally for each person. And it gives a kind of new insight into that human experience of the ocean and how it touches our lives in so many different ways and maybe unexpected ways. So that's why I was really, really excited. And there's the sad reality of the fact that how we've utterly failed to protect the ocean until this point, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. So the fact that I think it's maybe only 3% of the ocean is fully protected. So they hit the target, of 30% by 2030. I mean, it's in one way seems ambitious, but in another way, it's like, really, we have to petition and campaign for this. Why is it not
it's
a thing
only
already?
30%. And I think, as you said, like everything we know about the ocean so far is so impressive and impactful in terms of application. And as you rightly pointed out, we still don't know so much, about the ocean. And it seems like such a failure to not protect it before you find out,
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It holds like most of the world's like biodiversity, and there's so many species that we don't even know that exist. And we might not ever discover that because they could be gone by the time we realize. And just the fact that, I mean, the other connection that we have with the ocean, I'm talking about, I suppose, in there sort of this more experiential realm of using it as a form of therapy if we have access to that. But even if you've never been in the ocean, the evolutionary connection to the ocean is remarkable, and it stays, if you're looking at biomedicine, it stays in these sort of biomarkers in our body. And it's why so many of our medicines are derived from ocean species. And in particular, especially right now in a pandemic and with more and more viruses on the scene, the solution, I think, to a lot of them can be found through the ocean as well.
Totally.
So to cut ourselves off from the thing that's, the life force that's healing us seems mad.
Well, hopefully we get to reverse that as soon as possible. I do want to get to a few more meaty topics, and we definitely have some listener questions for you. But first, we're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. So I want to track back a little bit and talk about your interest in a professional surfing career. Coming from Ireland, and you said something that really struck me, which was you viewed competitive surfing or an interpretation of a professional surfing career with the Irish national surf team and whatever that led to as a window to a bigger world, which I've talked about a bit before on this podcast, not from a competitive standpoint, but coming from Southern California and sort of the Orange County bubble, that was really the primary driver, which had me gravitate towards surfing. I went, oh, wow, this is actually like a window to a bigger world where I can learn about different people and different cultures. And yeah, the surfing part's great, but it's like, it was more kind of horizon expanding. Did you feel the same about the opportunity to be a professional surfer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that was a huge driver for me. To the point where, I learned a lot through competitive surfing. Definitely. And it provides a really good container, especially in those, teenage years. I competed all the way kind of from when I was a kid, about 8 years old, through to I am in a mid to late 20s. So it was a few years ago. What did it represent for me? It's interesting because my upbringing, my dad's a surfer and I still surf with him all the time. But he's a real kind of, surfing for him is his spiritual practice, and he doesn't see any place for that competitive element at all. He isn't interested in the commercialization of it, and so he's that the real embodiment of the quote unquote soul surfer, if you're to put a label on it, I suppose. So it was an interesting dynamic, and I was a real super driven competition head on me when I was a kid.
That's not unlike like Tom Curran and his father Pat. So talking to Tom, like his dad was not into the competitive side at all, but that in a way drove Tom to kind of be like, well, I'm going to make this work.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I met actually Pat and Tom when they came to Ireland in Bundoran back when I was a grommet as well. So it was interesting. It was just really cool for me as a kid to see this other dynamic of like a father-son one as opposed to father-daughter. But yeah.
Well, and I guess too, like, so we're probably, you date me on this, but your competitive trajectory was what, sort of early aughties, like 2010s timeline. And I'm wondering if there was like a specific goal in mind when you were doing it, when you were traveling for the Irish national surf team. I'd imagine you did some QS events. Was it, I'm just gonna progress. I'm like battle my way up the rankings. I'm going to qualify for the championship tour. I'm going to win a world title. Was it that specific for you at any point?
Oh, I think I probably realized fairly early on that was going to be, that I was going to be a bit soul crushing for me to try to go all in with the competitive side. I mean, several reasons. One, it's just so isolating. You're in Ireland, you're not really part of a crew, again, on the edge of Europe, but even in terms of the surf scene. So it's very difficult to do that amount of travel alone. And then the resources were just non-existent. Thank goodness it's starting to change, especially for women surfing, but it was pretty desperate then. So funding wise, really difficult. And then the other thing, I quickly learned that I just didn't connect with I find it really challenging. I felt like I was caught in this kind of bubble, and I go to these amazing places for a surf event or championship, and then but we just kind of go from beach to beach to beach, and I felt like there was no real connection with the place and the people, and that's what was really pulling me. And then also I did wonder at this sense of we also came in as a self-contained almost unit and then left again, and right. I just wondered about that impact.
Sort of an imperial approach to traveling in a lot of ways, like you come in, you invading force, but I think what you're hitting on too is a big thing that I've struggled with in terms of just being present, and I think it's a little bit modern society, it's a little bit the institutions we're working in, but for example, this is my 16th year at the company, and I've traveled a lot for the company. I've never actually stayed in Paris, I've never done a day. I've gone to the airport and I've gone on, and it's kind of, I tell people that because I think you're well traveled, and it's like really not engaging with the community or the place or the culture or any kind of value, it's sort of being a part of the human species in a lot of ways. We're just kind of like coming in, we're thinking about the waves, and then we leave and we go to the next beach.
Yeah, and for me, it was on this kind of, there were, these series of kind of little revelations along the way. But the challenge initially was that I didn't have any blueprint to work off it to be like a traveling free surfer. So to do the whole, I'm trying to think of someone at that time who, there's so many male examples. If you could go and explore the whole surf exploration kind of genre and do travel, get the shots, write the story, and get it in the mag. And there just wasn't really that space for women. And so I didn't have much reference material in terms of role models. But then I quickly realized actually maybe that is the best way to combine my skills, because I've always loved writing. And luckily the timing just worked. In the UK, there was a launch of a magazine, Surf Girl, which are still going, who were supportive and would run my story. So I began to sort of carve out that kind of niche as a kind of surf travel writer. And then I realized I'm getting, way more fun out of doing that. And interestingly, then that is actually what led me into something like the marine science, because I was spending more time in the places I was in. So I was seeing what was happening, for example, on the coral reefs or the changes over time, and then starting to understand people's experiences of the sea in different cultures. So it really helped feed all of that. And then my relationship shifted again with surfing, and it was much more about, a lens to really create greater understanding between people.
Well, and I'm curious about the layer in between and I'm sure it overlapped, where you're traveling for the Irish national surf team, you're doing QS events, you have this competitive framework that you're experiencing life as a professional surfer through. And then in between then and now, there was also this, for you, very, very successful gravitation towards big wave surfing. And I'm wondering when that took root for you in sort of your arc.
Yeah, and it's so interesting looking back in retrospect at these moments in time. With big wave surfing, it was this really powerful alignment at that time in my life. I would say it was all around, I suppose, like 2010. 2007 was the first time, it was sort of the catalyst when Chris Malloy, Keith might have been over as well. I'd met them over the years touring in from Ireland, so they were kind of good mentors already. But they had come over to shoot Wave Riders with local guy Richie Fitzgerald and Gabe Davies, so this documentary film, Wave Riders. And it was also when the Cliffs of Moher Aliens was sort of first written. It was that kind of year. And I just had a session with him there during the shoot where I went to watch, and then ended up getting a wave, and then just had this mind-blowing experience, as you can imagine, at a place like that, having never tried anything like that. And then, but it was, a good few years trying to put it together, get a jet ski, find a tow partner, all that jazz. But in Ireland too, it was kind of just beginning. Sure. So we were, there was a very kind of loose, tight-knit crew who were trying to figure all of this out. And so it was a really fun time. But I don't know if you call Mullaghmore fun, but that's the wave that's in my backyard. So that was a good proving ground. But 2010 was also... Sorry.
Go on. Sorry. No, please. I was just going to say, I was going to ask you to pronounce Mullaghmore for me, because I have butchered it on this podcast before.
Well, we shorten it to Mully a lot, but yeah, Mullaghmore. But in terms of the alignment, interestingly, as I was really drawn to big wave surfing, was also when I had just started PhD, which was in Northern Ireland. But having, in a way, something like that was really grounding, because it meant I was just here all the time and here for the whole winter rather than traveling, which is what you need to be, just ready and waiting when there's waves. And doing a PhD, it's a much more kind of flexible form of study if you're disciplined enough to get the work done. But I feel like it seems nuts looking back now that I went to those extremes. But I feel like maybe I needed the intensity, like that kind of balance of the sort of intensity of the mind stuff, the head stuff.
Right.
I needed to feel that as intensely and in my body by doing big wave surfing, perhaps.
The sort of unfortunately, the sort of systemic, racism and misogyny within the surfing institutional world is something that we're all still having to combat and wrestle and rectify. And I think a lot of that lends itself to parts of surfing feeling almost impenetrable from people that are not like white males, to be frank. And I'd imagine that big wave surfing, specifically at the time that you took it up, was really feeling impenetrable for a lot of women around the world. Do you think that because you grew up in Ireland and there was a little bit of an outsider element to your upbringing that actually helped you here, where you didn't have as many sort of issues with that because I'm here and I know that I can do these things and my experience has told me I can do these things?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there's a few things. There's the fact that I had that kind of mentorship from my father, my uncle Willie, who surfed, but they would have pioneered a lot of bigger waves in their day too. And then my tow partners, my cousin Neil, and so I felt like that there was that kind of protective buffer from family, anyways, that was very encouraging and motivating. And so I never felt like I didn't belong because of that. But then on the other side, in terms of women in that space, weren't very many that were visible. But actually, I had when I first started surfing, and I had a subscription to Wahine magazine at the time, which unfortunately it had to fold. But I always remember an issue in centerfold is Sarah Gerhardt taking off in Mavericks, like a huge drop at Mavs. And it was the first time I'd seen a wave that big with a woman on it and in a wetsuit in cold water. So that immediately got pinned on my wall long before I ever had any intention of going near big waves. But it just definitely seeded something in me. And that remains very powerful for me now. I since got to meet Sarah and everything since, which has been amazing. But my point being, it's just remarkable the impact of an image and that impact that can have on a girl and then what she believes is possible. So it's so important to have that kind of storytelling.
Totally. Big wave icon Ross Clark-Jones once said that when dealing with dangerous wipeouts and being held under by big waves, he begins to imagine he's in a nightclub. He said, it's about distracting and diluting yourself from the reality because the reality is kind of a worry. I personally don't consider nightclubs to be a safe space for me, but does this actually, I guess big wave surfing and dealing with sort of the dangers of it, has that influenced your thinking with sort of the blue mind that you've talked about before? And could you elaborate on a few techniques of staying in the blue mind sort of state of mind when you're confronted with big wave hold downs?
Yeah, so I love the blue mind concept and then the work that's been evolving around it since, thanks to Wallace J. Nichols and his book. But yeah, for me, I realized that's what I was cultivating before I got a hold of the book. And I really struggled with the mental side of it, of like not psyching myself out too much. And then, I felt it really difficult. And when I first started to not carry a whole baggage load of expectations with me out into the water, especially because there's so many of those narratives of needing to prove yourself in a different way because you're a woman, right? So I felt like I was almost harder on myself as a result. And I think, a lot of this is what I realized I was dragging along with me that I didn't need to. Or the other thing is like the way it gets portrayed is that you have to show up and be like, really like tough and show that you're psyched and have that bravado. When in actual fact, I realized it's just really important to show up with all of who you are and to feel all that you're feeling. Because for me, what it became was this really powerful place of encounter, like permission to allow all of those emotions, and to really get to know myself in a really different way in those extreme environments. But in order to get to that place, that kind of, I suppose, self-awareness in a way was through mindfulness and mindfulness-based practice. So really then training the mind and creating this kind of blue mind effect, which is, how do you switch on that state of presence and calm when you're in a really confronting high stress scenario, when you should be in red mind, when you need that, when you need a certain amount of it, right? The red mind being the adrenaline, the energy that's going to get you out of the danger zone, right? So it was interesting in big wave surfing. There's this kind of constant sort of dance between these two states of mind. But going back to the Ross Clark Jones one, mine would not be a nightclub. And I've actually worked a lot with different visualizations, and they're so powerful and important. I kind of do funnily enough, I trained in mindfulness-based practice, and I used to always struggle with the body scan. So you kind of start at your left big toe, and then you go all the way through your entire body. And I just get really bored and distracted trying to do it and lose focus when on land. But I find it really good in the water because it just takes, it's a great way to connect with your body. And then it takes enough time that you're not, I find that's my approach to stay with my body.
It's so interesting because it does seem like, and I'll clump you into this group too, like the very, very small group of high level surfers that seem relatively well adjusted, almost 100% has to do with the mindfulness work that they have to do. And I think about this a lot in the sense of, there's no shortage of diagnosed and undiagnosed cases of sort of bipolar manic depression with sort of extreme action sports athletes and certainly in surfing. And surfing, when you think about it, is sort of a high-low kind of activity. You're either, up riding a wave and you've got all this adrenaline and you're excited, or you're just kind of sitting there, or you're out, you're actually getting to surf, or you're kind of in your sort of civilian life and going through your day, or you're on a surf trip, or it's very kind of stilted in terms of stop, start, and high, low. And have you ever thought about that, I guess, is the question, but also the follow-up is that, do you think that the mindfulness work and the mind-based training is something that's helped you navigate that in as healthy a way as possible?
Oh yeah, it's because it's like the dark side, isn't it?
Sure.
Surfing, but you described it so well, and that's really true. And definitely growing up in a household where my dad is surf obsessed, we're both surf addicts in that sense. But really, the highs and lows he would go through if you have like a dry spell with no waves for a while, or and that's always the hard one, isn't it, too? Especially when you have those real peak moments, those peak experiences that you get, the high, say in big wave surfing, and how do you come ashore? I always find that really interesting. How do you integrate that world into your civilian life, as you put it? I think what actually really helped me. So I went into doing a lot of more mindfulness based work, but a really interesting body of work I've been exploring the last few years, and I wish I'd known especially as a young female competitive surfer, is around this work around which I've spoken about quite a bit, around cycles. So this more cyclical approach to how we live, how we work, that taps into our sort of natural biorhythms and how to track them, and work with the sort of the natural energy flows that we have, which ebb and flow. They're not always firing, not always firing on all cylinders, and actually recognizing that's normal, that's healthy. Whereas, often as an athlete too, you're conditioned to, and it's the same in academia actually, like that these sort of everything is to do with performance indicators and being productive. And so if you're if you're in that ebb state or need to sort of rest or want to reflect or be still, then it's not valued as much. So that understanding for me has really been so helpful. And I think it's especially helpful for women because it's inbuilt. You know, we have our own sort of cyclical force with the menstrual cycle. And of course, then, you know, all humans have it because we've evolved with nature. But I think that's a huge untapped area, and it excites me because I'm starting to see it become more mainstream and starting to even be used in professional sports, like the menstrual cycle tracking in women's pro soccer. And it kind of stuns me, though, that it hasn't, like, we haven't caught on in surfing. Like, we're so, you know, kind of naturally attuned to cycles of tides and moons and seasons already, and scheduling our lives around it. That would be a really wonderful extra layer, because it's such a great way to just, especially from a health perspective, to, and for women, to create a more positive body relationship, especially.
I love what you're saying just about the cycles thing too, because I think that ties into the addictive nature of surfing. And, you know, we talk about it a lot, where it's sort of this, it's more than a sport, it's more than a lifestyle. And this passion that comes from surfers is really speaking to like an identity for them in a lot of ways. And even just speaking for myself recently, like I was never a very, very good surfer. I think I'm a better surfer today than I was, but I'm battling sort of, I'm 37, you know, like age and physical weapons that I may have had that I didn't. I never had many physical weapons, but it's one of those things where I've interpreted it as, okay, I need to surf every day, not just to get better, but to kind of maintain like a sort of a bizarre obsession with, you know, ripping or whatever it is, shortboard surfing, right? And we've had a pretty good run of waves here on the West Coast recently, but in the last couple of weeks, the winds have been really bad where I live, and all the banks are gutted. And I have been taking to walking the trails behind my house in the hills every morning, just to get outside and to kind of clear my head. And I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I said, you know, I still love surfing, but Jesus, the amount of energy I spend obsessing over, like, where is the bank? What is the swell doing? What is the tide doing? What is the wind doing? What board do I ride? Like, how do I tick that box every day, compared to I turn up to the trail at 6 a.m. every day and it's still there. Like, and that's not to say like I'm going to give it up surfing, but it's really, really been an experience for me, just speaking very candidly and recently, of I can still feel good about myself physically and get outside without having to tap this addiction every day. And in a lot of cases, I probably end up surfing better when I do, because I'm not kind of burnt out or exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one. It's myself and my partner that started this year decided we'd do this kind of, just for the hell of it, a cold water immersion challenge, so that like every day, if we weren't surfing, then we had to go for a sea swim. No wetsuit, just like a sea dip, let's be honest. I'm not really swimming around in that temperature water for too long. And it was super, like, actually almost painful for the first few days or week. And we had our coldest spell here. But actually, after a while, it changed. And there was something in a way that changed it's a very different perspective on the ocean, too, as you're trying to find a spot usually that doesn't have waves, but also doesn't depend on what the waves are doing. And it's like maybe you're just figuring out maybe the tides, what state the tide is. But it was just something so freeing about you just stripping down, jumping in, and after a few minutes, feeling that transformation and whole shift in the nervous system. And it was like, didn't have to worry about the boards or the wetsuit or the surf work. It's not a replacement, but it's interesting I think it's important to shift up our perspective every now and again, especially as surfers. We're very,
I totally agree.
The center of the universe.
Yeah, and the value of disruption, I think, is something that's really, really important. We've touched on it a little bit so far in this conversation, but you know, there's, in my opinion, we both kind of have experienced how special surfing is and how powerful it is and how it can be applied, even though we don't fully understand it or the ocean to certain aspects of human life. And then there are institutions that have been built on top of surfing, whether it's the surf industry or the surf media or even the sport itself, that have attempted to synthesize what makes it special for whatever agenda it has, right? Commercial agenda, et cetera. And I think it's often imperfect, but it is it's just something that's interesting, right? Because people continue to go back to the well because they appreciate, hey, this is a very, very powerful thing. there are positive outcomes to it, but we're not always, how am I put this? We're not always expressing it in the best way. And I wonder if you've thought of that just through your experiences as a professional surfer and now working in academia.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's huge opportunity there, which excites me. But then I've also been wondering, like, why is it that I feel like maybe surfing as an industry hasn't really embodied those more, I suppose, the eco qualities, the ecological kind of inherent qualities that come with surfing, and having that kind of such an intimate connection with a really powerful part of that living force of the earth, right? That we don't really get very often in our everyday lives as humans, you know? And so it seems like, you know, as surfers, we're really primed to be these stewards and custodians and to have this innate connection and to be environmental activists. And there are a lot of examples of that. But I also wondered, is inherent in surf culture is this notion of kind of escapism. So we want to just get away and not deal with any of the problems or issues.
Sure,
sometimes.
of course, yeah.
So there's that kind of element. But I think a bigger issue is the fact that often surfing has been sold as this space for escapism, freedom, of, you know, that kind of the perfect wave narrative too, that constant search. But it does exclude the whole issue around, I suppose, power, you know, how there are real huge exclusionary forces at play, especially around the coastal space and access to the coast and the sea and surfing. And that's kind of then fed these inequalities and why there's been such a lack of diversity and inclusion in something like surfing and the surf industry until more recently. So it's good to see that slowly shifting.
You know, I wonder if it's, like we talked about the information age earlier, I wonder if, you know, for all the challenges that it's brought upon society, if that is actually one of the benefits, in that there's not really anywhere to hide, you know, and I think kind of the idea of surfing is, as you so eloquently put it, of being connected to the power of the planet and potentially being, you know, champions for ecological health. All these sort of special things that maybe these institutions liked to, and not even maliciously, but fronted or marketed themselves as being, really truly have to acknowledge that they're not living it, or they're not authentically honoring it in the information age, right? Because again, there's nowhere to hide. So, you know, I think it's that you know, and I wonder if that's sort of, you know, a silver lining to all this, where it does feel painful. It does. There's been a ton of introspection, I'd even say sort of in the last 12 months, about inclusion and diversity and some of the challenges that institutions have sort of had to wrestle with in a lot of ways. I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot recently.
Yeah, it's interesting. The shifts at play. I wonder what I wanted to say in response to that. It's funny too, because it's like there's a few things going on. It's also like, in a way, it feels like surfing has almost been slow to change, and yet surfing as a metaphor is all about, you know, I use it I run a leadership retreat called the Wavemaker Collective with two colleagues of mine, Lindsay Hawk and Carolina Pereira. We usually do it every year in Portugal on hold. But we kind of draw on the principles of what we've learned from what we value from surfing in the sea, and to create this kind of a way to sort of this kind of learning environment. So learning through nature and being immersed in the ocean. But I mean, surfing is just a classic for it of risk taking, of meeting fear, of so it's just right for fueling innovation and taking these kind of risks, especially around in terms of like design and yet it's almost like, I feel like surfing as an industry, especially when it comes to the products we use, is trying to play almost catch up because right.
You know,
and
it's funny, right? Because like I just real quick, like Tyler Wright and I were talking exactly about this, and I didn't want to forget the point, which was, you know, as you put it, like the ocean, you could argue, is the most alien frontier for the human species in a lot of ways, like on the planet. And where the ocean meets the land is kind of the most violent part of this alien frontier. So the act of surfing in and of itself is sort of insane, and it attracts a certain set of insane people, which I think is where, the idea of like surfers are progressive nonconformists because they are this group of people. But as you pointed out, it's when progressive nonconformity gets kind of institutionalized through capitalism, the result is sort of this behind the times conservatism that permeates the system in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's sort of it's a funny one, isn't it? And it's like, but again, I think that's changing in a way because there's this, in a way, the technology and the information age and this thing of traceability and the circular economy and wanting to understand like the full journey of what we use and how we use it. And I think there's huge potential as well through how, there's, I feel like a greater connection being made with the stories of who the pro surfers are on tour now, through different media platforms that WSL are creating. And it's a great opportunity then. They have, such, I suppose, power and influence and reach to talk on issues like this more, and the impact that would have if we can get those more, sustainable materials and start to like mainstream it. But we need to create more incentives for that really as well. And I'll have a lot more honest conversations about, should we really just be using this just because of certain performance aspects,
Of course. And it's funny, right? Because we talked about those three elements of the institutions in surfing. And I'm sure there's elements, again, sort of waving the progressive nonconformist, and in some cases anarchist flag of like burn the whole thing to the ground. But the true purposes behind these institutions are actually really, really cool when they understand what they are. Like the surf media has the opportunity to, as we talked about, like create windows into a broader world for people that they otherwise wouldn't not be exposed to. The sport in and of itself, and I'm no apologist, but like, you get these sort of Gladwellian second conversations of social advancement with, the rise of the Brazilian storm. Without the sport, there's no platform for them to do that. And I think, the teething is interesting, but it ultimately is a net positive for people to be exposed to that. And even the industry, you developed the I'm going to screw the name up, the Finisterre sea suit. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I was confident about sea suit. I wasn't confident about Finisterre. But it, this is an example of the industry developing a functional garment that can be worn by Muslim women in the water. And that's very, very cool.
Yeah, I mean, Finisterre, great example. They're a surf company in Cornwall in the UK of really, they're the first sort of surf company to become a B Corp here in Europe, I believe. So their whole model is very much about that transparency, the story of the product, as well as the people who use them. And the sea suit kind of came about just from through direct experiences of lived realities and needs of women in different parts of the world that just weren't being met. And for some alternative to like a body covering that wasn't a bikini and board shorts or a wetsuit, and so it's just exciting to have those kinds of creative design challenges, and then companies want to put their weight and expertise into it. And it's a great space for innovation now around textiles and materials. So it's ripe for collaboration, I think, with surfing and industry and science, but also the need to better understand what those lived experiences and needs are in the first place, especially for women and girls and other minority groups, and not to assume them. So to hear their voices more and have platforms for that. So that's why I think there's a huge opportunity. There's so many surfers in the world now, and because of COVID, there seems like a lot more going into the sea, with showing a real interest. And I also feel like a kind of, up until now, maybe a missed opportunity has been, how much as surfers are we ocean literate? We understand what we need to in terms of tides and swell forecasting, but how much do we actually know about our local ecosystem, of the spots that we surf and the species that we share it with? And so I think finding a way to integrate greater ocean literacy and understanding of the ocean through learning something like surfing would be amazing. And totally doable. And then you just all of a sudden have this huge kind of mass of ocean-minded citizens, surfers, who are all literate in the ocean.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, I do think as painful as it's been, you know, the journey we've been on and continue to be on is sort of transforming these institutions. Not 100%, it's not going to be 100% right, but in a way that will be more effective and authentic to expressing, you know, surfing. And I say this all the time, you know, we're in a unique position working in surfing because the right thing to do is also the right business thing to do in a lot of ways. And maybe that's a function of the information age, but it's like, that's kind of the point. Like, if you do the right thing, that's actually the right thing for your business. And that's how you're going to survive. We have a new segment for the podcast because it's a new year. These are the top 5 power rankings. And for you, Easkey, we have asked you the top 5 ways that the ocean can benefit your health, either physical or mental. I'm sure we've touched on a few, but why don't you take us through your rankings?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to rank these in order, but I think, well, I suppose number 1 has to be the fact that the ocean is the life support system. You can't get really any bigger than that. So, you know, from regulating our climate to acting as a carbon sink to providing our oxygen supply, food, energy, medicine. So the ocean is our life support system. And then second, it's that the ocean, or this kind of, I suppose, concept of blue space is extremely restorative and actually significantly more restorative even than other types of more land-based environments. So there is definitely something about water.
Well, and it's funny because you touched on that before with cystic fibrosis and all the studies that are happening. But even anecdotally, I can say for myself, but I hear it all the time when someone's like, oh, my back hurts or my knee hurts or whatever. And then they go out there and they surf and they look unbelievable. Not myself, but I feel much better. I don't feel like I'm hurt when I'm surfing, which is bizarre. But I do think that's an element of it where it is the environment that, for whatever reason, physical or psychological, there is a healing element to it.
Absolutely. I mean, we could go into the like sub rankings here, but yeah. So maybe another reason why it's so restorative is that, yeah, one way it's so multisensory, I know, which is really important right now when we're depending very much on, you know, the visual or the audio or, you know, through screen time, and being indoors a lot more because of COVID. That's being then immersed in such a multisensory environment really brings us, you know, takes us out of our head and like fully into our bodies. So there's that really powerful space for self-connection.
So number 3 is multisensory.
Multisensory. Okay, that's
that
great. We got 3. 4 has to be, for me, it's the benefit of cold water. Which, you know, you think, yeah, right, okay. I can see your skepticism already. I can feel it from here.
I am 100% with you. I'm a polar bear swim advocate, even though I don't do anything.
But yeah, it's extremely beneficial for our health on so many levels. But just the most recent study to come out, in the UK, they're still working on it, but they're just discovering that when you're immersed in cold water, so you know, get it from surfing or from swimming, it releases this protein in the brain that's associated with reducing the risk of dementia. Mm-hmm. And so it's great sort of preventative measure for a lot of those mental illnesses that are kind of growing in the world as well.
I'd imagine that, like, you know, the sort of it's not trend, but sort of you seeing it, I guess, sort mm-hmm. of more prevalent, sort of the ice bath component of people using it to probably do the same thing or reset their immune system. I've thought about that on very cold days where there must be an element of that. It might not be as extreme as sort of an ice bath submerge, but like, you know, you're going out there and it's cold and your body is responding to this environment in a way that's a version of a reset.
Yeah, and if you unfortunately don't have access to cold water, the cold water shower is also amazing. I didn't believe it, and it feels so terrible when you first do it, but trust me, it's incredible. It's like a, you know, full body workout. It's amazing for your metabolism. Your body's trying to reach that homeostasis again after being shocked with the cold. But I will say, there is also cold water shock, so definitely go gently with yourself.
Right.
Take time and breathe deep, and don't just dive straight in there.
The poor Hawaiians are really behind the 8 ball on this one, so they're going to have to do the ice bath and the cold water shower.
I think they probably have one up on us, having figured all this out back in 400 AD, and they could probably learn a thing or two.
I think so. They don't need the ice bath.
Which I think is really important actually to acknowledge when we do it, especially, I mean, science is as guilty as well as anything else. But we talk about now, use terms like blue space and blue health and blue mind, and it feels like this is sort of this new emerging, discipline in science. But of course, we're building on sort of very, ancient indigenous wisdom traditions for the most part, knowledge, whole bodies of knowledge that's already been there for millennia about the value and impact of water for our health. And we're just trying to, in Western society and modern science is just catching up, basically.
Yeah, it is one of the great tragedies when knowledge and information and earned experience is being quote unquote rediscovered without the prior knowledge, just because cultures and communications and prejudice and bias are not translating that information across time in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think that's so important to acknowledge, because the more we acknowledge it, the more we're going to be eyes open to it. And that's kind of it, right? Where it's like, let's not have history repeat itself. Let's learn and kind of get better as a species.
Absolutely. And on that, I think I have to go with the number 5 is just how, where would arts and poetry and literature and all of our creativity be without the ocean? It just inspires awe and wonder as much as it does also fear. Like, it's this place of paradox, but it's just this place that really encourages insight, ignites creativity. It's so important, I think, to have those experiences in our lives and to really value experiences of actual awe and wonder that make us feel, I suppose, more humble as well as feeling more a part of it all as well. I definitely, that's my experience of it. That's really important. And that element of mystery, there's still so much unknown. But just because we don't know it all, doesn't mean we shouldn't, we should value it even more, I think, because of its mystery.
I love it. That's a great top 5. We did this for the first time last week with Randy Rarick, and I said, I don't know who's going to be able to match the bar. I think you matched and surpassed, but I'll maintain my theory that the next person's probably screwed on this segment. So those were fantastic.
Amazing. Oh, that's so cool. You had Randy on. That's how I first ended up in Hawaii, was thanks to Randy Rarick. Yeah.
He's a good dude.
Yeah. He discovered my dad's artwork and invited him to do the poster for the Pipe Masters one year. And Dad doesn't like crowds or warm water, so Mom and I had to go. Yeah.
What a bonus. All right. So we've got 2 more segments. The first one we've got, the penultimate segment, are questions from the Instagram community. We put it out there on our platform at the Lineup Pod, and had dozens come in, but we narrowed it down to 3. So the first question is from Odie Oddwire, who's a regular commenter for us. It's great. Question is, when will we see another Irishman or woman on the championship tour? I guess he's laying claim to Glenn Hall as an Irishman on tour.
I'd like to say, I mean, it's a good question, but in part of me wonders, why hasn't it happened already? We've got incredible waves here. But I think maybe that's part of the issue, is that we've got incredible waves. And so we kind of just get comfortable with staying put and surfing waves rather than, it's a difficult one to put yourself through the contest circuit at that level and to leave home. So I feel like surfers in Ireland have pretty close ties to Ireland that maybe hampers their more global exploits. But I don't know. It's a good question. I think where we're seeing it actually, and we're already seeing it, is in the big wave arena for sure. That's where it's happening.
Yeah.
So surfers you get surfers like Conor McGuire just last season, that phenomenal day at Mullaghmore. And that his performance is built on the pioneering work of so many others. Garrett McDade is also stepping up in big waves, but has made a really good stab on some of the Pro Tour events too. yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think in Irish culture, we have a kind of interesting relationship with, in a way, it still seems like a little bit counterculture here. Maybe that's something to do with it.
Well, and I mean, I think the desire to stay close to your home is not 100% unique to Ireland. I think you see that a lot with, you know, whether it's Hawaiians or people in Indonesia. It's when you love your home and you love surfing at home, it's very, very hard, as you intimately understand, like traveling the world to pursue qualification. And I think that's one of the things we're actually trying to address in the redesign of the tours and competition framework, is stabilizing and giving people regional opportunities to build up their experience and make that decision if they want to travel internationally. And you know, I hope we're going to get there.
Interesting. Yeah.
The second question comes from a ringer, inside job here. Jessie Miley Dyer asks,
Oh, no.
did you enjoy, this question can go a dozen different ways. Did you enjoy traveling with her in her Volvo as a junior surfer?
Oh, Jessie. Of course. What else can I say to that? Yeah, no, I think actually it was amazing. I first met Jessie Miley Dyer on a surf trip, the first kind of international trip I did away from home, age 16, to Tahiti. And we surfed chokes. We were like 15, 16 years old. Nev Hyman, surfboard shaper of mine at the time, somehow coordinated this pack of teenage girls to make it there from all corners of the world. But yeah, we had a blast. That Jessie really, for me, was that first meeting of another female surfer my age who was just like so gung-ho and absolutely ripping. So she was just really good to spar off. And yeah, and then also to counter that, you know, I come all the way from Ireland and doing the Pro Junior series, say in Australia and places, and in Europe, it was just so good to have a buddy. Yeah, we'll have to get together again and do a Volvo trip. I've told her West Coast of Ireland.
All right, and the final question from the Instagram community that we are going to ask is from Sully Ray 123, who asks, early 2000s Bundaran or 2021 Bundaran?
Oh.
I figured you would know it. I figured you would know what this question meant. I kind of was like, oh, well, it probably means something.
Bundarung. 2021. It's got surely 2021. It's the year of possibility, right?
All right, let's go. I'm good with that. We're forward facing here. All right, so those are the Instagram community questions. Thanks to all our listeners who sent those in. And for the final segment, we have the lightning round, which is 10 questions. Answer as fast as you can.
Oh, dear. Right. Should have done this at the start, Dave.
Yeah. Energy's waning. All right. If you could have one board set up for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad, bonzer, or finless, which would it be?
Oh, that's so hard. Twin, just because that's where I'm at right now.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
Oh. Current book is Breathe.
Best surf film ever?
Oh. Litmus.
One wave you never have to go back to?
Oh, Costa de Caparica. Sorry.
If you only get to surf one wave the rest of your life?
Oh, I'm not allowed to say. West Coast of Ireland.
Best person to share the lineup with?
My dad.
Worst person to share the lineup with?
Oh. Well, a shark, I suppose.
Totally fair. Last question, or last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by...
I will next achieve a state of happiness by taking my little niece down to the sea to do what we call wave running. She just learned how to walk. So we chase waves.
Perfect answer. Well, Easkey Britton, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for the conversation. Where can listeners check out and support what you do day in and day out?
Yeah, the best way to connect is my website, easkeybritton.com. Maybe get the spelling in the show notes.
We will put it in the promotion notes, no problem.
Or Instagram at Easkey Surf.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.